She thought she was just escaping her past, but that single embrace would change both their lives forever. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. In the dusty town of Eagle Creek, 1875, Sarah Mitchell hurried down the wooden boardwalk, her heart pounding against her ribs. The evening sun cast long shadows as she glanced nervously over her shoulder, spotting the familiar silhouette of Jeb Taylor, her former fiancé and the town's most notorious troublemaker, weaving through the crowd in pursuit. "Damn it all," she muttered under her breath, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 months since she'd broken their engagement after discovering his gambling debts and violent temper, and still, he wouldn't leave her be. Sarah ducked into the general store, nodding briefly at Mrs. Henderson before slipping between the shelves. Through the window, she watched Jeb's tall frame stalking past, his face contorted with anger. She couldn't keep running forever. Her father's ranch lay 5 miles outside town, and darkness was falling fast. When she thought the coast was clear, Sarah stepped back onto the street, only to hear Jeb's voice calling after her. "Sarah, you can't keep avoiding me, darlin'." Panic seized her as she spotted him rounding the corner. Without thinking, Sarah rushed toward the saloon where a stranger was mounting his horse, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair tied back beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He wore simple clothes, but something about his posture spoke of dignity and strength. "Excuse me, sir," Sarah called, approaching him with forced brightness. "I'm so glad I found you." The stranger turned, revealing sharp, observant eyes and features that hinted at Native American heritage, though he was dressed like any frontier settler. His expression remained impassive as Sarah reached him. "Play along, please," she whispered urgently, before throwing her arms around him in an embrace. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The man stiffened momentarily before his strong arms cautiously returned her embrace. Over his shoulder, Sarah watched Jeb slow his approach, confusion replacing the anger on his face. "Do I know you, miss?" the stranger asked quietly, his voice deep and accented with subtle cadences she couldn't place. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she whispered against his shoulder. "That man following me won't take no for an answer. I'm sorry to involve you." The stranger's gaze shifted to Jeb, who had stopped several yards away, watching them with narrowed eyes. Something unspoken passed between the men, a silent assessment that made Jeb take an involuntary step backward. "I am Wolf Shadow," the man said, only for her ears. "Though in town, I go by Samuel Gray." Sarah pulled back slightly, meeting eyes that seemed to contain depths she couldn't fathom. In them she saw caution, intelligence, and something else, a guarded secret. "Thank you, Samuel," she said loudly enough for Jeb to hear. "I was worried you wouldn't make it to escort me home." Wolf Shadow, or Samuel, studied her face for a moment before nodding slightly. "Your father's ranch?" "The Mitchell place north of town," she confirmed softly. With graceful efficiency, he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back provided an unexpected comfort as they rode past Jeb, whose hands had balled into fists at his sides. "This isn't over, Sarah," Jeb called after them. Samuel guided the horse at a steady pace through town. As buildings gave way to open country, Sarah felt herself breathing easier. "I apologize for involving you in my troubles," she said, breaking the silence between them. "Jeb and I were engaged until I discovered his true character." "Men like him understand only strength," Samuel replied, his words carefully measured. "He saw something in my eyes that made him reconsider." Sarah turned slightly to look at her rescuer. "What did he see?" Samuel's expression remained unreadable in the fading light. "Perhaps the knowledge that I would not hesitate to defend someone in need." As they rode, Sarah noticed details she had missed in her panic. The way he handled the horse with natural ease, how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the unusual beadwork hidden inside the collar of his otherwise ordinary shirt. "You're not just Samuel Gray, are you?" she asked quietly. The man was silent for several long moments before responding. "I walk between two worlds, Miss Mitchell. Among my people, I am Wolf Shadow of the Comanche. In your world, I am Samuel Gray, scout and trader." Sarah felt a flutter of surprise, quickly followed by curiosity rather than fear. "What brings a Comanche warrior into Eagle Creek dressed as a settler?" "Survival," he answered simply, "and a mission that requires discretion." The silhouette of the Mitchell ranch appeared on the horizon, lanterns already lit against the gathering darkness. Samuel slowed the horse to a walk. "My father will want to thank you properly," Sarah said. "Please come inside." Something like regret crossed his features. Another time, perhaps, it would be complicated. Before she could protest, they were approaching the ranch house, and her father stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand until he recognized his daughter. "Sarah, we were getting worried," Thomas Mitchell called out, eyeing the stranger who had delivered her home. Samuel helped her dismount with strong, steady hands. "Your daughter was having some trouble in town," he explained. "I offered assistance." Thomas Mitchell approached, extending his hand. "I'm obliged to you, Mr. Gray." "Samuel Gray," he answered, accepting the handshake. Sarah watched something pass between them, her father's initial suspicion giving way to cautious respect as he assessed the man before him. "Join us for supper, Mr. Gray," her father offered. "Least we can do." To Sarah's surprise, Samuel nodded. "Thank you. I would be honored." As they walked toward the house, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what secrets this Comanche warrior carried, and why fate had brought him into her life just when she needed someone to stand between her and danger. The Mitchell family dining room was warm and inviting, the table set with their best china, a stark contrast to the tension Sarah felt watching Wolf Shadow carefully navigate this unfamiliar terrain. He sat straight-backed but not uncomfortable, handling the silverware with practiced ease that suggested this wasn't his first time at a settler's table. "So, Mr. Gray," Thomas Mitchell said between bites of venison stew, "what brings you to Eagle Creek? Not many strangers pass through these days without business at the fort or the mines." Wolf Shadow met the older man's gaze directly. "I trade in horses and information, sir. The army at Fort Richardson occasionally employs my scouting services." Sarah's younger brother, Daniel, leaned forward eagerly. "You're a scout. Have you fought Indians?" A ghost of a smile touched Wolf Shadow's lips. "I have found that understanding people serves better than fighting them." Sarah noticed how carefully he answered, revealing little while appearing forthcoming. She wondered how many white households he had sat in like this, concealing his true identity, while gathering whatever information his people needed. "Mr. Gray helped me avoid an unpleasant encounter with Jeb Taylor in town," Sarah explained, changing the subject. "He refused to take no for an answer. Again." Her father's expression darkened. "That boy needs a lesson in respect. I should ride into town tomorrow and have a word with Sheriff Collins." "Pa, that would only make things worse," Sarah protested. "Jeb's pride is already wounded enough." "A wounded pride can make a man dangerous," Wolf Shadow observed quietly, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. "Particularly a man who believes he owns what he desires." Something in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear of him, but recognition of the truth in his words. She wondered what experiences had taught him this wisdom. After dinner, while her mother and Daniel cleared the table, Thomas invited their guest to the porch for a smoke. Sarah followed, settling into the rocking chair while the men lit their pipes. "Beautiful land you have here," Wolf Shadow commented, gazing out at the rolling hills that stretched toward distant mountains. "Been in Mitchell hands for 15 years now," her father said with pride. "Built every structure myself, with Sarah and Daniel's help after their mother passed." A shadow crossed Wolf Shadow's face. "This valley was once hunting grounds for several tribes. The creek that runs through your south pasture is called Singing Waters in my language." The statement hung in the air, neither accusation nor simple observation. Thomas Mitchell puffed thoughtfully on his pipe before responding. "Land has a way of changing hands throughout history," he said carefully. "But a good steward respects what came before." Wolf Shadow nodded slightly, seeming to appreciate the acknowledgement. "The land remembers, Mr. Mitchell. It carries all our stories." Sarah watched this exchange with growing fascination. Her father was no friend to Indians, few settlers were, yet something about Wolf Shadow's dignified presence seemed to command respect rather than hostility. "You mentioned you're a horse trader," Sarah said. "We've got 2 young quarter horses that need breaking. Pa was planning to hire someone from town, but perhaps you'd be interested in the work?" Wolf Shadow turned to her, surprise briefly visible in his eyes before he masked it. "I would need to see the horses first." Thomas Mitchell studied the younger man. Fair enough. You can look them over in the morning before you head back to town. Pa, Sarah interjected. With Jeb causing trouble, maybe Mr. Gray could stay a few days. We could use the help with the spring roundup anyway. Her father raised an eyebrow, clearly seeing through her suggestion. But after a moment's consideration, he nodded. We could use an extra hand. The bunkhouse has an empty bed if you're interested in a week's work, Gray. Wolf Shadow hesitated, and Sarah could almost see him weighing unknown factors in his mind. I have business to conclude in town tomorrow, he finally said, but I could return afterward for a few days' work. Later, as Sarah showed him to the bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept, they walked in silence through the cool night air. Only when they were out of earshot of the main house did she speak. You're here for a reason that has nothing to do with trading or scouting, isn't that right? Wolf Shadow stopped, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features seemed carved from stone. You are perceptive, Miss Mitchell. Sarah, please, she corrected. And it wasn't difficult to perceive. You choose your words too carefully to be what you claim. He studied her for a long moment. Why did you suggest I stay? Because I'm curious, she admitted honestly. And because Jeb won't come around if you're here. A hint of amusement softened his expression. So I am both an object of curiosity and a shield against unwanted attention? Sarah felt her cheeks warm. That sounds terrible when you put it that way. It sounds honest, he countered. Honesty is rare between our peoples. They reached the bunkhouse and Sarah paused with her hand on the door. I don't know what brought you here disguised as Samuel Gray, but I know you're taking a risk every moment you spend among us. Why? Wolf Shadow looked beyond her to the distant mountains, silhouetted against the starlit sky. My people are being forced onto reservations far from our ancestral lands. The buffalo are disappearing. The old ways are dying. His eyes returned to hers, intense and resolute. I am looking for a way forward that doesn't end in more bloodshed. The weight of his words settled between them. Sarah had heard stories of Indian wars since childhood, but always from the settler perspective. Standing face to face with a Comanche warrior who spoke of peace rather than vengeance, challenged everything she'd been taught to believe. Be careful in town tomorrow, she said softly. Jeb has friends who wouldn't take kindly to how you intervened today. Wolf Shadow nodded. I have lived among your people long enough to know which battles to avoid. He paused, then added, Thank you for your concern, Sarah Mitchell. The way he said her name, giving equal weight to each syllable as if testing its shape in his mouth, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Good night, Wolf Shadow, she replied, deliberately using his true name. A look of surprise crossed his face, followed by something that might have been respect. Good night, he answered, disappearing into the bunkhouse. As Sarah walked back to the main house, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, as if meeting this man had opened a door she hadn't known existed, revealing complexities in the frontier life she had always taken for granted. The following days brought an unexpected rhythm to the Mitchell ranch. True to his word, Wolf Shadow returned from town and began working with the young quarter horses. Sarah found herself inventing reasons to visit the corral, mesmerized by the way he worked, not breaking the horses' spirits as most trainers did, but partnering with them through a patient process that seemed more conversation than conquest. You whisper to them, she observed one afternoon, leaning against the fence as he guided a spirited bay mare through basic commands. Wolf Shadow glanced at her, a rare smile lightening his features. My people believe horses carry messages between worlds. They understand more than most men give them credit for. What do they tell you? Sarah asked, only half joking. He ran a hand along the mare's sleek neck. This one says she wants to run. She has fire in her blood. His eyes met Sarah's. Like someone else I've come to know. The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. Over the past days, she'd found herself drawn to his quiet strength and the careful way he considered his words before speaking, so different from the impulsive declarations and empty flattery she'd received from Jeb and other local suitors. Pa says you've accomplished more with these horses in 3 days than most trainers do in 3 weeks, she told him. He's impressed. Your father is a fair man, Wolf Shadow replied. Not what I expected when I first arrived. Sarah tilted her head curiously. And what did you expect? He secured the mare in her stall before answering. Most settlers see my people only as obstacles to be removed or enemies to be feared. Your father sees a man first, though he remains cautious. And what do you see when you look at us? She asked boldly. Wolf Shadow wiped his hands on a cloth, considering her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I see people who love this land but don't yet understand it, who build permanent structures but don't know the stories beneath their feet. He paused. And, occasionally, I see someone willing to look beyond what they've been taught. His gaze held hers, and Sarah felt the weight of unspoken possibilities between them, possibilities that defied the rigid boundaries separating their worlds. The moment was broken by Daniel's excited shout from the main house. "Riders coming!" Wolf Shadow's posture instantly changed, tension replacing ease as his hand instinctively moved to his belt, where Sarah knew he carried a knife. "4 men," he said, scanning the horizon with eyes far sharper than hers. "One of them is Taylor." Sarah's stomach knotted with dread. "Jeb wouldn't come alone, he's too much of a coward." "Go inside," Wolf Shadow instructed. "Tell your father." She hesitated only briefly before hurrying toward the house, finding her father already on the porch, rifle in hand. "It's Jeb," she reported, with 3 others. Thomas Mitchell's face hardened. "Daniel, get inside with your mother. Sarah, fetch the shotgun from my office." By the time the riders reached the front of the house, Sarah had returned with the weapon, standing slightly behind her father while Wolf Shadow positioned himself to the side, his stance casual but alert. "Mitchell," Jeb called out, pulling his horse to a stop. His companions spread out slightly, men Sarah recognized from town as Jeb's drinking companions, none of them known for their good character. "Just want a word with your daughter and this Indian lover she's taken up with." Sarah felt her face flush with anger. Wolf Shadow remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "You're trespassing on my property, Taylor," Thomas Mitchell replied evenly. "Whatever business you think you have with my daughter can wait for another day when you're sober and alone." Jeb spat on the ground. "Heard some interesting news in town today about your hired hand there. Barkeep at the Silver Dollar says he's seen him meeting with Indians outside town. Might be a spy, Mitchell, passing information to those Comanche raiders causing trouble up north." Sarah glanced at Wolf Shadow, whose only reaction was a slight narrowing of his eyes. "Mr. Gray has proven himself an honest worker and a friend to this family," her father responded. "More than I can say for you, Taylor. Now turn around and ride out before this gets ugly." One of Jeb's companions, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, leaned forward in his saddle. "Army's paying good money for information on Indian sympathizers these days. Might be worth our while to drag him in. You'd need to be alive to collect any reward." Wolf Shadow spoke for the first time, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable threat. Tension crackled in the air as the men assessed each other. Sarah tightened her grip on the shotgun, terrified of what might happen next but determined not to show fear. 4 against 2 doesn't favor you, Mitchell," Jeb sneered, though Sarah noticed he was carefully avoiding Wolf Shadow's steady gaze. 3, came another voice as Ben Lewis, the Mitchell's longtime ranch hand, emerged from the barn with a rifle trained on the intruders. "And I'm a fair shot even with one eye." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before Jeb jerked his horse around. "This isn't over," he warned, glaring at Sarah. "Your Indian friend can't stay forever, and neither can you hide behind your daddy's gun." "Don't come back, Jeb," Sarah called after him. "Next time, I'll shoot first and ask questions later." The riders departed in a cloud of dust, their threats hanging in the air like the approaching storm clouds on the horizon. Thomas Mitchell lowered his rifle with a heavy sigh. "That boy's pa was a good man. Shame he didn't live to see what his son's become." He turned to Wolf Shadow. "Is what he said true? Are you meeting with Comanche outside town?" Wolf Shadow met the older man's gaze directly. "Yes, my cousin. He brings news of our family still living free beyond the reservations." Sarah expected her father to explode with anger at this admission, but instead, he simply nodded slowly. "Figured it was something like that. Don't much care what business you have with your own people, but others around here won't see it that way." He gestured toward the retreating riders. "Jeb's just looking for trouble, but if word spreads to the wrong ears—" "I understand," Wolf Shadow said. "I have already stayed longer than I intended." Sarah felt her heart sink at his words. "You're leaving?" "It would be safer for everyone," he acknowledged, though something in his eyes when he looked at her suggested reluctance. Thomas Mitchell cleared his throat. "At least stay through tomorrow's storm. No sense riding out into that weather." He nodded toward the darkening sky. "We can discuss your plans after it passes." Later that evening, as rain began to lash against the windows, Sarah found Wolf Shadow alone on the covered porch, watching the storm roll across the valley. "In my tradition, thunderstorms are the voice of powerful spirits," he said as she joined him. "They cleanse the earth and remind us of forces greater than ourselves." "What will you do when you leave here?" Sarah asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind all evening. Wolf Shadow turned to face her, raindrops illuminated behind him by the lantern light from the window. "Continue my journey. There is a council gathering of several tribes next moon, leaders who seek peaceful solutions while maintaining our ways of life." "It sounds impossible," Sarah said softly. "Peace, I mean. There's so much bitterness on both sides. The impossible becomes possible one person at a time," he replied, like a settler's daughter who sees a Comanche warrior as a man first. The way he looked at her then, with warmth and something deeper that made her pulse quicken, told Sarah that whatever had been growing between them these past days wasn't one-sided. Despite every boundary of culture and circumstance that should have kept them apart, some connection had formed that defied easy explanation. "I never thanked you properly," she said, "for that day in town, for playing along with my desperate plan." A smile touched his lips. "It was unexpected. In my culture, such an embrace would have meant something very different." "What would it have meant?" she asked, stepping closer. "A declaration, a choosing." His voice lowered. "Among my people, when a woman selects a warrior so publicly, it is rarely a momentary convenience." The implications hung between them as the storm intensified, matching the tumult of emotions Sarah felt. Common sense told her to retreat, to maintain the careful distance that society demanded between them. Instead, she found herself drawn forward by something stronger than convention. "And if it wasn't just convenience," she whispered, "if I've come to care what happens to you." Wolf Shadow's expression softened with vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Then you would be choosing a difficult path, Sarah Mitchell, one walked between two worlds, belonging fully to neither." Thunder crashed overhead as Sarah made the bravest decision of her life, reaching out to take his hand. "Perhaps it's time for a new path altogether." Dawn broke over the Mitchell ranch with the fresh clarity that follows a powerful storm. Puddles reflected the pink-gold sky as Sarah made her way to the stables, her mind still filled with the previous night's conversation with Wolf Shadow. They had talked for hours on the porch, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their fears, finding unexpected common ground despite their different worlds. She found him already at work, brushing down her father's favorite gelding with methodical care. "You're up early," she observed, leaning against the stall door. Wolf Shadow glanced up, a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there when they first met. "The dawn is sacred time, a moment between worlds when possibilities seem clearest." "And what possibilities are you seeing this morning?" Sarah asked, her heart beating a little faster when his gaze met hers. "Difficult ones," he admitted, setting down the brush. "Your father offered me a permanent position here yesterday, as horse trainer and ranch hand." Sarah couldn't contain her surprise, or her hope. "That's wonderful. Will you accept?" Wolf Shadow moved toward her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "My journey is not complete. The council gathering still awaits. My people need voices that can speak of peaceful coexistence without surrender." He paused. "But for the first time, I find myself wanting to return somewhere afterward." The implication wasn't lost on Sarah. "You'd come back here? To a settler's ranch?" "To you," he corrected softly, "if that is what you would want." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hooves pulled their attention outside. Sarah followed Wolf Shadow to the stable entrance, where they watched a military patrol of 6 soldiers riding toward the main house. "The cavalry rarely comes this far from Fort Richardson unless they're tracking someone," Wolf Shadow observed, his body tensing. "Or responding to accusations," Sarah added grimly, thinking of Jeb's threats. Thomas Mitchell emerged from the house to meet the soldiers, and Sarah hurried across the yard to join him, conscious of Wolf's shadow following at a more measured pace. The patrol leader, a lieutenant with a sun-weathered face, touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, Mitchell. Sorry to disturb you so early." "What brings the army to my doorstep, Lieutenant Monroe?" her father asked. "Reports of Comanche activity in the area," the officer replied. "A band crossed the Red River 3 days ago, raided the Thompson place yesterday. No casualties, but they took horses and supplies." His gaze drifted to Wolf's shadow, who had positioned himself slightly apart. "This your new hand?" "Samuel Gray," her father confirmed. "Best horse trainer I've seen in years." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed slightly. "Gray, you say? There's been talk in town about a man matching your description having meetings with Indians outside town limits." Wolf's shadow met the officer's suspicious gaze evenly. "I trade information as well as horses, Lieutenant. The Army has benefited from my network of contacts before." "That right?" Monroe seemed unconvinced. "Which company did you scout for?" "Captain James Reynolds, 3rd Cavalry," Wolf's shadow replied without hesitation. "During the winter campaign of '72. Sarah held her breath as the lieutenant considered this information. She knew Wolf's shadow was walking a dangerous line, telling enough truth to be credible while concealing his true identity and purpose. "Reynolds was transferred east last year," Monroe finally said. "Convenient. Written commendations are in my saddlebag if you wish to see them," Wolf's shadow offered calmly. The lieutenant waved this away. "That won't be necessary for now. But I'd be interested to know if you've seen or heard anything about this Comanche band. 7 or 8 warriors, led by one they call Running Wolf." Something flickered in Wolf's shadow's eyes. Recognition, Sarah realized with a chill. He knew the name. "I have not encountered them," he answered carefully. "But if they raided for supplies rather than attacking people, they may be a splinter group avoiding the reservations, not looking for war." Monroe's expression hardened. "They're looking for something, that's certain. Thompson said they searched his house before taking his horses." He turned back to Thomas Mitchell. "Keep your eyes open, and if your man here hears anything through his contacts, Fort Richardson would be obliged for the information." After the patrol departed, Sarah found herself alone with Wolf's shadow and her father near the corral. The tension in the air was palpable. "You know this Running Wolf, don't you?" Thomas Mitchell asked bluntly. Wolf's shadow was silent for a long moment before answering. "He is my brother." Sarah gasped softly, while her father's expression remained impassive. "I suspected something of the sort," the older man said. "No ordinary scout has the knowledge of horses and land that you've demonstrated." He studied Wolf's shadow carefully. "Are you riding with them?" "No," Wolf's shadow replied firmly. "I seek a different path, but I understand why they resist the reservations. The conditions there are not what was promised." Thomas Mitchell removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "I fought Indians in my younger days, lost friends to raids. Wouldn't have believed I'd ever trust one on my land." He replaced his hat, decision made. "But I judge a man by his actions, not his birth. You've proven yourself here." "Pa," Sarah interjected, "if the Army keeps searching, they'll eventually discover who he really is. Which is why I need to leave," Wolf's shadow confirmed. "Today." Sarah felt her heart constrict. "But you said—" "I said I wanted to return," he interrupted gently. "And I do. But first I must find my brother and convince him to attend the council. His band is young, angry. They need to hear the wisdom of the elders who seek peace." Thomas Mitchell nodded slowly. "The Thompson place is northeast of here. 3 hours' ride. If that's where they were yesterday, they would move west afterward," Wolf's shadow concluded. "Away from the settlements toward the canyon lands." Sarah recognized the exchange for what it was. Her father was helping Wolf's shadow track his own brother, despite knowing it could be considered treason by many. The realization of how much had changed in just a few days left her breathless. "You'll need supplies," she said, practical concerns overtaking emotional ones for the moment. "And you can't go as Samuel Gray. The Army will be looking for him now." Wolf's shadow smiled slightly. "I have other clothing hidden near town. My brother will not recognize me dressed as a settler." 2 hours later, with saddlebags packed and farewells imminent, Sarah stood with Wolf Shadow beside his horse at the edge of Mitchell property. Her father had discreetly withdrawn to give them privacy, understanding more than Sarah had given him credit for. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The council is 20 days from now," he replied. "If successful, I could return within a month." "If successful," she echoed. "And if not?" Wolf Shadow took her hands in his touch warm and sure. "The world is changing, Sarah. The old ways are passing, but new ones are being born. Whatever happens, I have seen a future I want to fight for. One where understanding bridges the space between different peoples. A future where a Comanche warrior and a settler's daughter might find common ground," she asked, allowing herself to hope. His smile reached his eyes, transforming his face. "We have already found it, have we not?" In a gesture that defied all the unwritten rules that should have kept them apart, Wolf Shadow reached out to touch her cheek gently. "Among my people, when a warrior goes on a dangerous journey, he sometimes leaves something precious with one who waits for his return." From inside his shirt, he withdrew a small leather pouch suspended on a cord. Opening it, he revealed a smooth stone of deep blue, shot through with veins of copper. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained, placing the cord around Sarah's neck. "It is said to connect the wearer to the stars that guide us home." Sarah touched the stone where it rested against her collarbone, overwhelmed by the significance of the gift. "I'll keep it safe until you return." "Keep yourself safe," he countered. "Jeb Taylor still poses a threat." "Pa and I will handle Jeb," she assured him. "You focus on finding your brother and making it back in one piece." Wolf Shadow mounted his horse with fluid grace, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "When I return, we will need to decide what path we choose to walk together." "I already know my choice," Sarah replied with certainty that surprised even herself. "I've never felt more alive than these days with you, learning to see the world through new eyes." Something like joy flickered across his features. "Then I have even greater reason to return quickly." He turned his horse westward, but paused to look back at her one final time. "The Comanche have a saying, 'The sun and moon circle each other forever, separate but always connected.' Remember this if the waiting grows difficult." Sarah watched him ride away, the morning sun illuminating his silhouette against the vast Texas landscape. The stone at her throat seemed to warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of promises made and possibilities waiting to unfold. 3 weeks later, as Sarah sat on the porch mending a shirt, she spotted a lone rider approaching from the west. Even at a distance, she recognized the straight-backed posture and fluid movement that belonged to only one man. Her heart leaped as she set aside her sewing and stood. Wolf Shadow had returned as promised, but he was not dressed as either Samuel Gray or in traditional Comanche attire. Instead, he wore a practical blend of both worlds, comfortable for long journeys between different territories, both geographic and cultural. As he dismounted before her, Sarah could see new lines of weariness around his eyes, but also a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. "Your brother?" she asked. "Safe, with others who chose the council's path," he replied. "There will be difficulties ahead, but also hope." Sarah took a step forward, suddenly shy despite the letters they had exchanged through a trusted trader during his absence. "And us? Did you decide about your path?" Wolf Shadow closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I have spent my life between worlds, belonging fully to neither. But perhaps that is not a curse but a gift, to see with more than one set of eyes, to understand with more than one heart." He glanced toward the ranch house where Thomas Mitchell stood watching them from the doorway. "Your father has offered me land at the western edge of his property, a place to build, to raise horses in the old ways while teaching settlers to understand them better." Sarah felt joy bubbling up within her, a bridge between worlds. "Beginning with us," Wolf Shadow confirmed, his eyes reflecting all she felt. "If you are still certain." In answer, Sarah reached up to touch his face, no longer constrained by the boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable, more certain than ever. As Wolf Shadow pulled her into an embrace that sealed their choice to forge a new path together, Sarah thought of how a desperate act in town, hugging a stranger to escape her past, had unexpectedly opened the door to her future. A future where understanding could indeed bridge the space between different worlds, beginning with two hearts brave enough to try.